Hi, welcome to the home of real leadership. And it's a real honor today to welcome Glen Poma, who is the Senior Manager for Planning and Allocation for OpenReach. One of the things we want to do on Thorol is to bring leaders that you would never normally get to hear from. And Glen is very much like that. Glen is somebody on who all of us depend, not least the UK economy, working with OpenReach. He's got a very high pressure role, and he stays so calm. So before you share your top 3 tips, Glen, how do you manage to stay so calm?
Um, I guess 15 years of experience in the business, there's probably not many scenarios I haven't come across yet, which that experience really does help with all sorts of situations. And I don't know, I guess just from a really start of my career, I've always managed to help make decisions without too much emotion involved.
Okay,
Guess that's
well, that's perfect. And we can't wait to hear what your 3 tips are. So given that, we just can't wait to hear what Glen's 3 tips are. He's going to share 3 tips on leading a virtual team in a high pressure environment. Over to you, Glen.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm currently, as David said, Senior Manager Planning and Allocation in OpenReach. So what does that mean? Essentially, I plan and resource and allocate work to 17,000 service delivery engineers every single day, completing 150,000 customer visits a week, which is a challenge in itself. And I guess what I wanted to touch on today is I have a desk-based organization of 300 people. Normally, we work in offices from Edinburgh down to Exeter in a really vibrant atmosphere, working together as teams. We have visible leaders on each of the sites. So during this pandemic, it's really been different. We've had to move to remote working. We've had real big service challenges as well. So a lot of our engineering capacity has been reduced due to the fact some of our engineers have underlying health issues and quite rightly need to shield. But our volumes have continued to be really, really high. So in context, we've had 6 weeks in a row of record repair intake. So people really relying on broadband connectivity to run businesses, to keep families connected. So the demands for our services have been really high over the past probably 2 or 3 months, really. So it's been quite a challenge. So I guess what I wanted to talk a little bit about was how do you manage that transition of being in an office with your people day in, day out, to managing a large team remotely? Really challenging. So the first thing for me that I've really learned is uh, all about being an authentic leader and showing vulnerability. So it's okay to not be okay. You don't have to pretend everything's okay every day. So lockdowns impacted everybody, really tough. The same 4 walls every day, dividing between work and home life is harder than it ever has been. So being authentic and telling my people that, look, some days I struggle with that. I get up in the morning, I really need to get outside. It puts more pressure on. It's really difficult to switch off. Longer hours, especially when the work is as really high volume and high pressure as it is at the minute. So for me, that was one of the real things I learned to tell people how I'm feeling, tell people what my lockdown experience is, and then ultimately they will open up as well. And it enables you to show empathy. We're all human beings at the end of the day in the same environment. It's really difficult. So being an authentic, vulnerable leader would be my first tip. Really open up to your people and be afraid to show that you're not perfect yourself as a leader. Second one, I think consistency. So really important from a safety aspect during the pandemic. We have reacted constantly to government guideline changes. So one of the most important elements of my role, if not the most important, is keeping our engineers on the ground safe, knowing what they can do, not only to keep themselves safe, but members of the public safe. So we are really consistent with our communications around that, to the point where we've set up a separate help desk, which is manned by some of my team purely to give engineers somewhere to talk if they're really not sure what guidelines they should be following in order to keep them safe and have peace of mind. Obviously, a really emotive thing going into people's houses when there is such a real health threat on there. So I think being consistent in terms of talking about well-being, talking about how people are feeling. I've really opened up, and every week I send an email to my team with what I've been up to outside of work for the last week, whether it's playing Yahtzee, code names, whether it's having a date night with my partner and doing little daft pottery sculptures. And I just ask them questions like, what are you doing to break the monotony of lockdown, and what are you doing with your partners to keep relationships and families going during this time? So I do that every single week at the same time. Like I say, consistency of messaging, it feels really insincere if you start that kind of thing and then all of a sudden it stops. It feels like a tick in the box. You really do need to be present, consistent, and show that leadership throughout. So, and especially around safety, I can't put enough urgency around the need to be consistent and keeping the messaging simple. And I guess the third one for me, which doesn't always come naturally to me, I always rely on my partner for this, is creativity. So given that we are purely staring at each other via a webcam like we are right this second, what can we do that's slightly different to keep people engaged? So one thing I did with my leadership team directly was the notion of walking one-to-ones. So going on FaceTime, going outside, having a walk together, discussing things inside of work, outside of work, and just making it feel different. A bit like what you'd do in the workplace normally, grab a coffee in a room, just have a chat, doing that virtually. We've done all sorts of coffee break drop-in calls for our teams. We've done huddles led by the teams for the teams to talk about whatever they want to that they would normally do in their breaks within the work scheme. We've done all sorts of quizzes. We've had team socials as well. So what was really nice at Christmas was we gave everybody a certain budget to get a takeaway and all get together. A few of the teams did karaoke and things like that. So really being creative, testing out different ways of keeping people engaged. And again, not being afraid to make yourself look daft, having a fancy dress competition, bringing the teams together. And I guess in the really testing times that we've had work stack and service wise over the past few weeks, we've really had to be creative around what we can do to celebrate success. So I mentioned the really high repair intake. Some weeks we were receiving more faults than we were clearing. That's really difficult for our teams when they're working as hard as they are and they're not seeing that green shoots in the service position. So what we did every week was just, we were really creative to find something positive that we can share with our teams, celebrating any success, no matter how big or small, when everybody's on their own, really feeling the strain, has gone down really well and has been really critical to keeping our teams engaged, getting out of the service crisis that we found ourselves in. So they, for me, vulnerability, consistency, creativity have been the three leadership values that I've really focused on over the past few months.
Wow. And how, thank you very much for those, Glenn, very succinct and very of their time. How are your engineers being treated? Are they being treated differently? Are they being treated nicer or not so nice by people? Because presumably they're going to people's houses, or do they, have you noticed any difference at the moment?
Yeah, I think on the whole, reception of our engineers has been really positive. I guess similar in line with healthcare workers and being that key worker status. People are really relying on us to the point where we've had really nice stories of engineers being clapped off a street when they've gone and repaired broadband that everybody's really relying on at the minute. So we have received a really positive reception from the public for what we do.
And you worked your way up, is that right, in OpenReach?
Yeah, I've been with OpenReach 15 years in January just gone. I started off as an engineer on the ground, so climbing poles, jumping in big, horrible, filthy manholes and reconnecting cables, then through first line and second line leadership into the position that I find myself now via a mix of transformation and project management as well. So really lucky to work for a company that has such a wide range of roles and really promotes career progression.
And was it called OpenReach when you started?
No, interestingly, the first day when I was training and got my kit, it was still BT at the time. And then 2 weeks later, after I joined, it changed to OpenReach. So I got given one uniform, and then 2 weeks later, it was taken back off me and swapped for an OpenReach one, which was quite a weird.
You worked for 2 days for BT and for 15 years for OpenReach?
Pretty much, yeah.
And how many people do you have in your overall team?
So including the leadership team and some of the support staff, it is just over 300 people at the minute currently.
And do you have any competition? Because you provide the infrastructure, don't you? Which all the other companies come off. So is it like a sort of privatized, nationalized company?
So it's very much moving away from that. And I think especially in the FTTP build space, there's lots and lots of competition. You're quite right. There's lots of other big players, like Virgin Media. You've got other companies such as Hyper Optic and City Fibre, who very much specialize in certain areas, whether it be big blocks of flats or rural areas. So yeah, we really need to be on top of our game. It's very much not a monopoly. It's a lot about first mover advantage. And we have some real threats in the workplace now, which I think BT historically hasn't had.
And how is it structured geographically? Because it seems to me that whatever street I walk down in the UK, not that I do at the moment, of course, there's always an OpenReach van there. I mean, do you lease them? Everyone with an OpenReach van works for OpenReach, or do you just sell them on?
Yeah, we're set up geographically. So in service delivery, the part I operate in, so we have 17,000 split between 6 geographic regions who have a director of service, down through senior area managers, patch leads. So essentially in an area of probably 1 or 2 small towns, you'd have about 50 engineers potentially who look after that area. And then that, like I say, goes all the way up through the company.
How many emails do you get every day?
How many emails do I get every day? Oof, probably close to 1,000 at the minute, with all sorts of different escalations and things like that, trying to keep our customers updated with where we are in terms of service and things like that. So yeah, very busy for us at the minute.
So we've never done this with anyone else that we've interviewed. What's your 4th tip then? And I wanted to be on how on earth you manage your time then, given that pressure and that volume of emails.
I think for me, it's really questioning what you're doing. Anybody can dive into a load of work and get their head down and think they're busy. When things are that busy, you really need to understand what your end goal is. So take all the task orientated stuff out of the way. My role is to deliver a safe allocation of work to our engineers who can provide service to customers. And if some of those customers are more vulnerable than others, I need to make sure they are connected first. So I question myself every day, is what I'm currently occupying myself with helping towards that end goal? And if it's not, then ultimately it's not important, or it can wait. I think for me, that prioritization and not losing sight of what you're there to do is really important during busy times.
And finally, Glenn, one question I mean, this guy is propelling up OpenReach, like, you know, in a very short period of time. We may not get him again. So I want to ask him this question. Glenn, what's the funniest thing that's ever happened to you when you were an engineer?
The funniest thing that ever happened to me was a colleague who visited a customer's premises. They had a lovely ornate glass table, which they decided to put their toolbox on top of, and ultimately it went straight through, and his face was an absolute picture.
Okay, and good answer considering you didn't know I was going to ask you that question. Glen Poma, thank you for sparing the time. I say this to everyone, that I thank them for sparing the time. I particularly say it to you because you must be one of the busiest people on the planet. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.